All right. Well, first off, thank you all for showing up here. We all learned that we lost an hour overnight. Surprise to some of us on this stage. But this is an important and thoughtful conversation that we are about to have. And so I also want to just thank all of the panelists for taking the time to be here today. Can we just give another round of applause for the panelists here? So, of course, this session, reproductive freedom, good for workers, good for business. And I know we have some fresh research that we want to dig into. But first, for everyone that's here, I really just want to provide a little bit of information about the landscape that we are currently in. We are about 3 years post-Dobbs, Roe versus Wade being overturned. So, Nancy and Chelsea, I would love for you to just kick us off with telling us where we are right now, the realities that are playing out in this country. Nancy?
Thank you, Rachel, and it's good to be here. So before jumping into where we are, I do want to go back to say one or two things about the Dobbs case itself. Because, you know, we're here in Texas where the rallying cry has always been, remember the Alamo. Well, we have to have a rallying cry that's remember Dobbs, because that decision was the biggest setback for women's rights in U.S. history, to take away the autonomy over decision-making about our bodies and health. For all of those of you who have carried pregnancies to term, it's not a walk in the park, right? It has huge impacts for women's lives. So the Dobbs decision basically was the first time the Supreme Court has ever taken away an individual liberty. Right? The Supreme Court sometimes changes its mind on the Constitution, but doesn't take away liberties, and that's what they did in Dobbs. So, remember Dobbs. What happened after Dobbs? A crisis, which as we talk today, I want to talk about both opportunity in that crisis as well as threat. The threat part of it is 1/3 of American states have banned abortion, including here in the state of Texas, with really severe criminal penalties. In Texas, it's potentially 99 years in prison for a doctor or anyone who aids and abets. That is a serious situation. And so what it's meant for women here in Texas and throughout the country where abortion is banned is they have to either travel long distances out of state or forego being able to terminate a pregnancy that threatens their life and their health. And that is a situation that is hugely concerning. We've already had the first criminal prosecution filed in Louisiana against a doctor in New York for providing abortion care to a woman in Louisiana. And Louisiana has also indicted the mom, okay, for aiding and abetting. So it's a serious situation in terms of criminal threat. But what I want to also say is on the opportunity side, which is that at the same time states have moved to criminalize, as was noted in the introduction, 11 states have put reproductive freedom in their state constitutions in the wake of Dobbs. And these are not, you know, yes, California was such a state, Vermont was such a state, but also Ohio, Michigan, Missouri, Arizona, Montana, all of these states, strong majorities of their voters said, we want our rights protected. And they're joining states like Kansas, in which we won a case that protected the right in the Kansas Constitution. So this moment has to be understood. The threat is really, really real. The opportunity in states where voters can make their own decisions about their constitutional rights. They don't have that here in Texas, but that's also important. So we'll continue the conversation, but both those things are going on because the majority of people in this United States want to have the right to access safe and legal abortion.
Chelsea, pick up on that for us. You've done immense work in this space.
Yeah, Rachel, thank you so much, and thank you to South by Southwest for platforming this important conversation, particularly here in Texas. You know, while I think Nancy's framing is absolutely vital, that we're cognizant of harm and also mindful of the hope that we have to continue to try to protect women from harm in the here and now and in the future, I think it would feel wrong to me, though, to not acknowledge that at least 3 women have died here in Texas because they were denied medically necessary abortion care. A new study came out recently showing that rates of sepsis in pregnant women has increased by more than 50%. That maternal mortality here in Texas, as assessed by the CDC data that thankfully we at least still have access to, has increased by more than 50%. And you chortle when I make that comment about the CDC, but it's particularly salient here in Texas because Texas similar to Georgia, has now stopped questioning recent maternal mortality. The Commission on Maternal Mortality here in Texas has skipped just to now 2024, skipping over the last few years so that we won't actually have a good and accurate picture, in addition to what we can glean from federally collected data and the on-the-ground reporting from ProPublica and Texas Tribune and so many of the truly heroic investigative journalists who are ensuring that people here in Texas and beyond know the real consequences of these draconian abortion bans. I also can't sit here, particularly here in Austin, and not acknowledge certainly someone who is a hero to me, Amanda Zarowski, and the other women who filed the case with the Center for Reproductive Rights here in Texas, really with a not aggressive demand, just a simple request that the medical exceptions in SB 8 be better clarified so that doctors and nurses and midwives and other care providers and care institutions would know when they were legally able to intervene to save someone's life. Because Amanda had been forced into sepsis for multiple days before the doctors felt like she was finally at the precipice of death, and so they could intervene. That had catastrophic consequences for her ongoing health, and it completely sacrificed her future fertility. About a year ago now, a little less than a year ago, the Texas State Supreme Court demurred and said they thought the medical exceptions were clear, even though there were more than 20 women, including some doctors, saying they were not clear. And so we know the harm is immense, and yet we also know, as we heard from Nancy, that when voters have been able to vote either on protecting a right, reestablishing a right, enshrining a right, that overwhelmingly in most states, voters have chosen to ensure that women are able to make the right choices for ourselves and our families and our communities, and that doctors are actually able to uphold their Hippocratic oaths. We also know that we still have more work to do, and as I know we're going to talk about later in the panel, thankfully this is now being recognized as the whole society issue that it is, that it's not just about patient health or family health and well-being, or whether or not a doctor or a nurse can actually kind of do their job and live up to their vocation. But it is a matter of kind of broader societal and economic and fiscal health and well-being, and I'm grateful we're going to have that conversation too.
And I think what you're saying is so important too when we're talking about the full picture of what is happening right now. We have heard the stories of women like Amanda Zarowski, who bravely came forward to share what happened to her and her family. But a lot of this too, we have been waiting to see the data, waiting to see the numbers behind this. And so this is where I want to turn to you, Dr. Taylor, because I know that you have some fresh research out. You looked at all the states that have these restrictive abortion bans, or abortion bans in general. You looked at how many women are working in these states, the economies, the businesses, and you found some really interesting things about the impact that it is having. What stood out most to you?
Great. Thank you so much for that question, Rachel, and good afternoon, everyone here in the audience. So I am going to share a little bit with you about IWPR's research on this issue. And first, just to share that we partnered with the Center for Reproductive Rights, as well as Morning Consult, to conduct this research in 2 phases. The first phase, we did a survey of 10,000 individuals living across the country to get a sense of what their expectations were from their employers when it came to providing supports in this draconian environment around abortion-related restrictions. And then on the second phase, we actually talked to business leaders to get a sense of how they were meeting the moment at this time. So I'll share a few slides to get into some details about the top lines from this research. So the first stat that I wanted to share with you all is that 1 in 5 individuals are planning to have children within the next decade, and they have decided to move or are deciding to move out of states with restrictive abortion bans. Or they know someone who has moved due to these restrictions. We also know that 57% of likely future parents are prioritizing employers that actually offer supports for reproductive health care, whether it's in terms of their benefits or even the policies that they have in place within their organizations. We also know that while 56% of employed adults believe companies should work with lawmakers to protect reproductive rights, more than half of adults believe that companies should be loud and proud about their support for reproductive rights. And in all of this, we also found that some businesses are responding to the moment, right? Whether it's offering relocation assistance, expanded benefits, or even remote work to call in their employees who actually care about these issues, but also want to make sure that their benefits are supporting in their healthcare needs as well. So the top line is that abortion restrictions continue to be hugely unpopular, and it's having a broader impact on our economy. Based on additional research that IWPR has done, we also know that restrictive abortion bans cost the U.S. economy over $60 billion a year. Here in Texas alone, it costs the economy $16 billion.
Wow.
Yeah.
Say those numbers one more time for us. $60 billion?
$60 billion nationally. Here in Texas alone, $16 billion. And this is due to the fact that women are losing labor force participation due to these restrictive abortion bans.
I mean, those are just staggering figures. Elizabeth, I want to talk to you just about the business mindset. And what I find really fascinating about Bumble is that Bumble is a Texas-based company. And so I remember being a reporter here on the ground covering SB 8 at the time, the most restrictive abortion ban at the time. It was sort of the first domino that fell, banning abortion as early as 6 weeks into a woman's pregnancy. From a business model, from a business perspective, what was the approach at Bumble? How did you respond to what was happening in this state as it affected women at your company?
Thanks, Rachel, and thank you everybody for being here. So, Bumble, we are headquartered in Texas, but we have always been, woman-focused company and have always supported, the fact that gender equality is central to also, economic uplift. And we had previously indicated our support of reproductive health care through social posts and through some donations, but when SB 8 came down, we realized that this was now going to have a very real, very tangible impact on our employees. This was more than just a socialist issue. This was a business imperative, and it was incumbent upon us to look inward and see what benefits we were offering to our employees who were living in the state. So, immediately after SB 8 came down, and as we're seeing the likely fall of Dobbs on the horizon, we engaged with a digital healthcare platform called Maven to introduce benefits for our employees that gives them access to a pool of money that they can use to support any part of their reproductive journey, whether it's egg freezing or IVF or abortion, including travel for abortion. We audited our insurance providers to see what benefits they were offering, and ultimately electing to switch insurance providers to go to a company that was offering more robust benefits on that, on those issues. And for us, it was sort of a no-brainer. I mean, again, this is becoming an employee issue, and they expect us to take care of them, and it becomes, you risk losing employee trust and confidence or engagement from them if you're not looking out for them when, we're in this state. We have the shadow of the Capitol right here. So, we jumped right into it based on what we saw in SB 8 and have continued to, iterate and expand on those options for our employees and, calling out to our corporate peers to do the same.
If I can just ask a quick follow-up, what was the feedback from employees? What did you hear from them?
So this is one of our most popular employee benefits that we have. And they were incredibly grateful for the Maven benefit that we introduced for the expanded insurance. We also introduced a platform called Spring Health, which offers mental health benefits, so it also can assist people in their pre- and postpartum journeys. And when we were looking at the numbers recently, I mean, it's one of our most popular benefits. Both Spring Health and Maven, over 50% of our employee population has engaged with that benefit in some way, shape, or form. So we know it's something that our employees are very grateful for, and we know it's something that when we are attracting talent that they also pay a lot of attention to and are interested in.
You know, Nancy, one thing that I think is really interesting about what you said is that this research shows that reproductive health isn't just a personal issue, it is a workplace imperative. What are the implications for businesses? What's on the line for them to get this right?
Well, I think the whole conversation so far has really lifted that up. I mean, women in the workforce need to have the access to the full range of reproductive health care. We still live in a country where our insurance is mainly coming through our workplace. And so, you know, it's important for workers to talk to their workplaces, know what the benefits are, push them on that if they're in a banned state and their company is not covering travel benefits, to talk to them about that and do that. To talk to them also about why they may not want to be relocated to a state, right, that is not going to be a safe space for women to be. It's just dangerous, as Chelsea pointed out so well in talking about the Zarowski case that we brought against the state of Texas. It is not safe to be in any state that bans abortion if you're of reproductive age, because even if it's a pregnancy that you're hoping to bring to term, you don't know whether this pregnancy for you is one that's going to have a crisis. And you may not be able, as Amanda Zarowski was not able, to get out of the state. If you are in the middle, right, of losing all of your amniotic fluid, if you're in the middle of a crisis that takes you to the emergency room. So it's just not safe to be in these states. So, you know, for employers, they need to think about this, but they also need to think about the fact that, you know, as a public policy issue, you know, the kind of disarray, the kind of both health crisis and legal crisis, it's just not a good business environment, right? I mean, I will defer to, like, you know, Liz on that, our expert on business on this panel, but it's not a good business environment. What is unstable for your workforce and is unstable as a political matter.
Follow up to that, and of course we definitely want to bring Liz in. I think too, you know, the research that IWPR has done, or even when we talk about this issue in the context of workers, that also includes men. Men have a role to play here. I think one, in ensuring that the environment is safe for women, and, you know, if you're partnered with women, you know, this is affecting the women in your lives, and so we also need men to be advocates and leaders on this issue as well. I do want to put that out there, and to also recognize that these abortion bans are also impacting you. The research that IWPR did in terms of these surveys, we talked to both men and women, you know, to get their views on what they were looking for when it comes to the employer, the business response to this issue.
Well, and it also has kind of ricocheted effects on healthcare broadly, right? And so we certainly have seen fewer medical students are saying now they want to go into OBGYN care. Fewer residents are willing to come to residency programs in states that have banned abortion, partly because they're still required actually to receive that training. And so they know that if they're going to a training program, you stay here in Texas, they actually still have to leave for part of their training elsewhere, and so it's an enormous amount of kind of logistical, choreographic load that kind of OBGYN residents in abortion-banned states now have to undertake to ensure that they're receiving their training. Parenthetically, I also find it rather grotesque, is the word that I'm looking for, that the OBGYN boards are actually administered here in Texas. They're in an abortion-banned state in which students are required to demonstrate proficiency and expertise in being able to provide abortion care in a place where they would be effectively legally prohibited from doing so. We know in states with abortion bans, unfortunately, kind of the healthcare deserts that they often already were are only becoming even more so because Doctors are scared. They're also angry. They don't want to be told that they can't actually practice medicine. They also don't want to have to go to prison for up to 99 years and be crushed by fines in the hundreds of thousands of dollars and to be stripped of their medical license. And so I think in Idaho, we went from having 9 maternal fetal medicine doctors a few years ago to now, 4 or 5. So it's also about kind of where you choose to live, understanding that your opportunities to access healthcare outside of kind of reproductive healthcare are now going to be more challenging. And I so appreciate the point too that this is absolutely about men. I think one of the kind of most profound moments for me kind of to partner with the Center for Reproductive Rights and others in making a documentary about Amanda Zarowski and the other kind of named lead plaintiffs in the case were how clearly affected, devastated, their husbands, their partners, their children, their parents, their siblings, their families and their communities were kind of by the crushing reality that these women they loved so much were not able to access the care that everyone agreed that they needed, but that the doctors felt they couldn't provide in a timely fashion. And so this is a community issue. It is also about kind of the world here today, but also the world, tomorrow. If we're not adequately kind of training and supporting our future medical workforce, that has, devastating consequences for all of us, whether or not we're ever pregnant.
Chelsea, if I can ask a follow-up to you, just when we're talking about men being involved in this conversation, because I think some of this has to do with sometimes changing the perspective about how people look at an issue like reproductive rights. What would your message be to men that are looking to be allies in this fight? How should they approach this?
Well, there's a terrific organization called Men for Choice, run by a man named Orrin Jacobson. And so I would urge them to reach out to Orrin and to his team, in which kind of they every day live in the space of questioning how they can always be better allies, but also helping to support men to be allies and advocates. I mean, we certainly saw kind of with the election results in November, including in Florida, where we didn't get to the 60% threshold required to protect abortion, but where we did get to 57%, we had overwhelming support, particularly from men who are husbands and fathers, who said, we know this is our issue too, because this is about, the health and the well-being and the agency and the freedom of my wife, of my daughters, of my granddaughters. And so I think, again, Rachel, you were asking earlier about the data, helping to root conversations like this, of course, in kind of fundamental freedom and liberty and kind of what I certainly believe to be a Central American value is important. So too are the stories of very real, inescapable harm and death that have occurred because women were not able to access timely care and providers were not able to provide it. But so too, have to be the stories of people who didn't know this was their issue and now recognize that it is, including particularly, thankfully, men.
And I was just going to jump in to say one of the things that Amanda's husband, Josh, has said is, as a starting point, men should know more about pregnancy. Just literally learn more about pregnancy, learn about, the things. It is a wonderful thing. It is both a natural, process of life in which the human species continues, but it also can kill you, right? And so there's nothing like it, right? It's not a disease, but it can be very dangerous. But anyways, men should learn more about it, because Josh has said that certainly he has learned when all of a sudden your wife ends up in the emergency room with sepsis for 3 days on death's door. But learn about it now. And that's the first step to then becoming an advocate, to understand how important it is to be able to have access to reproductive health care for women, for everything, for access to contraception, to safe maternity care, to good obstetrics care, to, postpartum care, to abortion care, to, fertility treatment if it's needed, all of it.
I wanted to follow up too and continue with this theme on the healthcare piece, and to also say, the restrictive abortion environment in this country is actually contributing to our maternal health crisis. Right now, the United States has the worst maternal mortality rate compared to any other wealthy country. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related causes when compared to their white counterparts. So when we talk about this perfect storm of restrictions versus challenges navigating the healthcare system, we know that Black women are most harmed by these restrictive environments. And so I do think it's important to also connect that to these conversations. Another stat, because I'm clearly up here as the stat queen today, also wanted to share that in restrictive abortion states, the maternal death rate is actually 62% higher than it is in states with protective abortion laws.
Well, Elizabeth, let me take that to you then, because we've certainly heard from doctors. I've spoken to doctors, we reported on this, that have left. I've talked to residents who say, look, I may be studying in this state, but I don't want to practice here because of the restrictive abortion laws. They feel like their hands are tied. They can't provide the care that they need to for their families. But also on the other end of that, they don't necessarily feel like they want to raise a family in that state given the current laws. When you're looking at Bumble, and when SB 8 first went into effect here in Texas, did you hear from employees that said that they no longer wanted to live in this state?
We did, and we're aware that SB 8 did have an impact on our workforce in Texas, and that was certainly a challenge that, again, really prompted us to look at the benefits that we were offering because, of course, sometimes your response, even as a company, might be to up and leave, but that's not always, an option that is really available to you. So, we heard from our employees, we took that feedback, we looked at our benefits, we, expanded our benefits, and again, these are benefits we offer to our global workforce, so regardless of where an employee is located, if it's in Texas or any of the other states with restrictive bans in place, or even folks, who live in, states that have protective abortion laws in place, the benefits are all available to them there. And, again, it was quite a learning moment for us to kind of move this from seeing it as a social issue into a business issue, an employee issue. And, Nancy can probably quote the stat better than I can, or maybe Dr. Taylor, but if we're talking about the percentage of the population that supports some access to abortion care, it's significant. I mean, it's at 80%, it's quite high. And so, we think about it and it's presented as this controversial political issue, but it is not. It is, it's healthcare. And at the end of the day, that is something that companies should readily be able to get behind because we are talking about something directly impacting your workforce. And, companies should look, again, internally at what they're doing and then, start to build up that confidence and say, it's not as controversial as we think it is. It might feel, you might have some nerves about speaking out about it, but the risk of silence is now going to be greater given the direct impact that this is having on employees.
Well, and, Rachel, if I may kind of build on what Liz was saying, acknowledging kind of the overwhelming support for women to be able to access the health care that we need, not that long ago, a dozen years ago, there was broad agreement, including as evidenced by the Republican Party platform, that always abortion should be legal in cases of rape, incest, the life and the health of the mother. That was like a dozen years ago. That's not that long ago. And so kind of what SB 8 and kind of the harbinger that it was, really kind of signified was the very clear radicalization of abortion away from being, partly about public health, partly about patient health, partly about politics, partly about religion, into a very different space. And I think we just have to acknowledge that kind of, if we had been sitting, I'm sorry, I don't actually know how old South by Southwest is, but was it around like 15 years ago? Yes, okay. We would be having a very different conversation. And so that says to me too, and kind of the kind of anchoring, framing that Nancy opened with, that this is not what most of Americans either support now or have historically supported, and we have to remember that. That even kind of most people who identify as religious absolutely support women being able to access the care that they need to save their lives and their health. And so I think we have to just continue to remind ourselves of that the members of the Texas Supreme Court that ruled against Amanda and the other incredibly courageous plaintiffs, the kind of the state attorney general here, many elected representatives in the states that have the most kind of restrictive abortion bans do not represent the will of the people in those states, and certainly not kind of what most Americans believe in our minds, our hearts, and our American souls is right.
And Elizabeth was talking about sort of this place where a lot of these businesses are, where maybe they don't want to politicize the issue too much, but they're hearing from their employees, they're seeing the data, they're seeing the studies. So Nancy, what advice, what takeaways would you give to businesses who want to be pro-family, who want to be supportive of their employees, but just don't necessarily know what that first step looks like?
Well, the first step, and the thing is, the reality is, like, much reproductive health care is covered in most, employee programs by most companies. I mean, that's the kind of thing that, talk about that, abortion care is covered in people's health insurance plans, right? So the companies have already taken a position, to support that. And they should expand it as well. I mean, we're not, access to fertility treatments and IVF, all of that should be part of a comprehensive program for their employees. But they can also begin to, and some companies do this because they have recognized the business case for getting rid of abortion bans, that they are adding it to what they are talking about on their lobbying visits, both with their state legislators and in Washington. So they may not be taking, we have companies who have taken public positions, which is great, filed amicus briefs with the business case, for example, in the Zarowski case in the Texas Supreme Court, in other decisions that we have. But the first step a company can do is literally, and some are, and we know because we talk to them with our corporate engagement team who's with us here today, but when they go in to talk to their state legislators, when they go in to meet with their members of Congress, they say, listen, also, this is hurting us, right? This is hurting our business. Our employees don't want to work in, the state of Texas or the other states where there are bans. And this is the business case. And I'm making the business case about other things that, I'm talking to you about today, but this is one of them as well. So that is another, look at your employees, number one. Then add it to the business case that you're making when you're on your lobbying visits. You don't have to put a billboard in, Times Square. But eventually also, come out publicly and support it. Because again, this chaos of law and healthcare is just not a good business environment. And in the end of the day, just so people know, what is the end game here to this crisis is we do need federal legislation that will protect access to abortion care across the country. Hopefully more and more states will do it on their own, as we've talked about with the initiative states, but there's a huge disconnect in states like Texas where the majority of people in Texas want access to safe and legal abortion. Disconnect between the voters and who is running the state house. So we're gonna have to have federal protection. And it passed the House twice and was up to 49 votes in the Senate. So it is within eyesight to happen. And I do think having the private sector step in to support it is really, really important.
Dr. Taylor, we were talking last night when we were having dinner, and this is just one point that I know that is important to you to touch on as well. When you're talking about some of this research, and you found that 1 in 5 individuals planning to have children within the next decade have moved or know someone who has moved, but those are the people that can afford to do so, right? So also talking about the fact that that is not necessarily something that every individual could possibly do, even if they want to.
Yeah. We were just talking about, the research, and it dawned on me that, there are going to be people that are stuck, right? They don't have the resources or support to even move out of a restrictive abortion state. So as we talk about, as we're making gains on this issue, even how we're engaging the business community, just realizing that there are people among us that do have privilege and they're able to, be able to, access the funding that they need to move or relocate, or even decide to get a different job if their current employer doesn't support, reproductive rights. And so I just don't want those voices to get lost in this conversation, because as we've been talking about today, this is really a matter of life and death for women, even more so if you're already a part of, a marginalized group that is less likely to have access to comprehensive reproductive health care or access to information in order to be able to make informed decisions about your health. And so I want to make sure that we don't lose those folks in the conversation as well.
And given the research that you've done, do you expect these trend lines to continue if these restrictions and bans stay in place?
Absolutely. Again, I think we're going to continue to see, unfortunately, women dying because of these restrictive abortion bans. Our maternal mortality rate is increasing for Black women in this country, whereas it's fallen a bit for other populations. And so there are real implications here from that perspective in terms of healthcare, but also on some of these other healthcare challenges. But I'm hoping that people continue to engage and grow. Look, it's new for us to be talking about the business community in the way that we are when it comes to reproductive rights and access. Let's think about who else we need to call in when it comes to this issue, and looking to our partners at the Center for Reproductive Rights to continue to work together on this. But I think as people, we need to keep the drumbeat up. People need to continue to know we are in the majority. Those of us that support abortion rights are in the majority, and we need to continue to call people in.
Well, let me take that question to you, Chelsea, just on the perspective, because there may be some people that are going to be watching this that maybe are in states that don't have abortion restrictions and may feel like, oh, that's their problem over there.
Yeah, we're all Americans. Maybe I feel this so acutely because I'm from Arkansas, just right next door to Texas. I will say rather ignominiously in Arkansas, Arkansas is one of only 4 states that have not expanded Medicaid for 12 months postpartum for women who've given birth. Texas has, Arkansas hasn't, in the company of Iowa, Idaho, and Wisconsin. This is acutely painful, partly because Arkansas has the worst maternal mortality in the country. And something we haven't talked about yet here today is also that infant mortality has risen. And one of the women that we feature in the film Zarowski v. Texas is Samantha Cassiano, who was told at her 12-week anatomy scan that her baby had a fatal fetal abnormality. And either she would deliver a stillbirth or that the baby would be born alive but would suffer horrifically and die within a few hours. And she is a deeply religious person, and had said in the film, as she had had conversations with her priest and her family, she wished that she could have an abortion so that the baby wouldn't have to suffer and could go to heaven earlier. And she was not given that choice. And so to me, like, Samantha's an American. Like, she lives here in Texas, but she's an American. She's my fellow American citizen. Even if she wasn't an American, she would be my fellow human citizen. Like, I find it deeply problematic, Rachel, that I do hear sometimes something along the lines of, like, it's just terrible what's happening to, like, women in Arkansas. It's, like, terrible what's happening to, like, women in Texas. Oh my gosh, did you see what happened in Idaho? I'm like, do you see what is happening in the United States of America in the year of our Lord 2025? Like, this is happening to Americans and women in America. This is something that we have permitted because we have failed to have adequate federal protections to happen. Like, this is on all of us to continue to have conversations like this in Texas, but also in New York, where I now live, because this is happening in America and will continue to happen in America until we stop it from happening in America.
And I'm wondering if you can say how people can see the film Zarowski versus Texas. When you were talking about, Samantha's story, Samantha was here at South by Southwest last year talking about it, and to me, in so many ways, she's the heart of the film because she's someone who could not leave the state and did go through her entire pregnancy. Is the film available? Are there people able to watch it?
So we tried to give it away to any of the streamers, and none of them would take it because we were told it was too political. Wow. And I was like, no, but the point is it's actually not about politics. Like, that's the whole point. So now it's available on a new platform called Jolt. So yes, I hope if you haven't seen it that you will watch it. We're incredibly honored and humble to have been part of helping Amanda and Samantha and the other women who were in the film, including their extraordinary legal team from the Center for Reproductive Rights, to tell their story, because we do think it is a painfully American one, and one that everyone, we think, needs to bear witness to and to learn from and hopefully be enraged and inspired by. But yes, we did. We tried to give it away, and no one would take it. But we hope that you'll still find it online through Jolt and watch it.
Yeah, it's really incredibly powerful to hear from these women, just their bravery to be able to come forward and share exactly what they went through. And we know that for every single one of them that spoke out, there are plenty of other women who went through the same exact thing, who are living in the shadows, who have not spoken out yet. We have about 15 minutes left here, and I do want to turn and be forward-looking here, because Dr. Taylor, you mentioned this idea that this is sort of new, in the sense that I feel like every couple of months we're peeling back another layer of this onion, where we're getting more data, we're starting to get more of a picture, and some of this data, right, is from 2022, 2023. We're just starting to see the fuller picture of how this is impacting not only Americans, but also the workplace and the economy. So I want to just give some practical sort of takeaways for business leaders who may be listening to this conversation on what they can do. And when I listen to you, Chelsea, talk about things being too political, this idea that some people may look at this issue and not see it as a reproductive healthcare issue, but may see it as a politics issue. Certainly some business leaders may feel the same way. So Elizabeth, I'll start with you and just sort of the approach from Bumble. What advice would you have for business leaders out there who are looking to follow in very similar footsteps what you guys have done?
So again, and I think Nancy said this already, I mean, first thing is you have to look towards what you're offering to your employees, and you have to take care of your employees here. But then companies should realize the impact that they have and the platform that they can use their voice to advocate for on this issue, whether it is screaming from the rooftops. We did put a billboard out in NASDAQ, Times Square, or having those conversations with your legislators. You can join coalitions like the Don't Ban Equality Coalition. Talk to your other corporate peers, and understand and recognize that this is not a political issue. It's about healthcare. Talk to companies that have spoken out and ask us what the impact is that we're seeing. We'll tell you how positively our employees have reacted to it, how our consumers have reacted to it, even our investors have reacted to it. So, if you're feeling nervous, talk to the folks who are out there and hear their voice, hear their stories, and then, get involved, whether it's the conversations in passing with your lobbyists, because we all know that, you're having them, or if you are taking it on as your North Star advocacy platform, just slowly raise your voice louder and louder. And again, there are plenty of concrete steps that you can take, starting with your employee base and ending up on the steps of the legislature or on a NASDAQ billboard.
Chelsea, how do you want to see businesses approach this, especially in these states with the restrictive abortion bans?
Yeah, well, certainly, I would emphatically underscore Liz, and think she's certainly better positioned here as someone kind of firmly in the Texas business community. I would also say that if you are a business who's engaged with kind of environmental health and well-being, that's also a reproductive health issue. We know that environmental exposures to toxins or high particulate matter concentrations in the air is very dangerous for pregnant women and the children they're carrying. So too are rising heat levels. If you care about gun violence, that also is tragically a significant contributor to our maternal mortality here in the United States. If you care about our opioid crisis, that too is a tragic contributor to our maternal mortality crisis. If you care about good infrastructure, well, that also matters. Can someone actually access the care they need when they need it in an easy and available way? If you've been upset about kind of the NIH funding freezes and cuts, that also is about maternal health and mortality. Certainly many of the researchers that I know who have received large grants exactly in the areas of high-risk pregnancies have had their funding frozen because maybe they're focused on Black women, or maybe just there was a control F approach and gender was in the grant, right? So if you're kind of upset about that in principle, or if you're an investor who invests in biotech, like what do you think you're going to be funding in 5 or 10 years if the US government is not kind of the first risk capital into basic and applied science research, including as it relates to maternal health? So I would just say to Rachel, even if kind of you may not think this is your kind of core issue that either relates to your business, although I would hope it would be if you happen to employ any parents or aspiring parents, there's probably another area, an arena in which you are engaged kind of publicly, politically, civically, socially, and that too probably has implications for maternal health and well-being, and I would just hope that business leaders could make those connections.
Nancy, your call to action for businesses?
To add to what's already been thrown out in the conversation, I mean, I would say the first thing is to begin having the conversation. And to think about the fact that, you know, and this kind of builds on what Chelsea was saying about why we should all care. I mean, you know, this is your country. And right now, your country is an outlier. I mean, to just widen the lens, you know, in the last 30 years, 60 countries have liberalized their abortion laws. Only 4 countries have regressed: the United States, Poland, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. So this is not, again, just as like think big picture about a business environment, stability, opportunity for people to, you know, work and sell products and all of that. This is not a good turn of events, right? We have turned away from the trend that the rest of the world is going to, and it's going in that trend because it's essential for women's health and well-being to be able to control their reproductive lives. So I think you want to think about, you can't separate, you know, who you are as a business leader from the country in which you're operating in. So I would say have the conversation with yourself first and, you know, open up that conversation in the workplace and know that there are resources out there. There's the research, you know, look at the research, maybe, you know, share it with your employees. Think about the fact that long term, if this trend does not reverse, people are not going to be wanting to work in these states that ban abortion. And the research out there, don't ban equality. You can go to the website. A lot of us are working with them. You know, talk to companies, Levi's, Yelp, other companies, very, you know, vocal in their support. There are people who have, you know, gone before and done this.
From a research perspective, your biggest takeaway and also your call to action.
Yeah, I think from a research perspective, in terms of my biggest takeaway from the report, well, you know, IWPR conducts so many research projects on so many issues, and, you know, whereas I care about all of them, you know, I have built a career around reproductive justice, so this issue is near and dear to my heart. And I'm always amazed with what we continue to find when it comes on to this issue. Particularly with this project, you know, we needed that buffer of a few years to get a sense of what the impact of Dobbs was going to be. So I've just been fascinated with, you know, what we've been able to come up with, and, you know, huge shout out to CRR for approaching us for this partnership. I think what has stood out to me the most, though, is, the cost to, the economy. We have some of the most talented feminist economists on our team, and so having them take a step back and get a sense of what the economic implications have been for these abortion restrictions. I'm really proud to say that we're doing the work. No other organization is doing that type of work. So I think that's probably my biggest takeaway. And in terms of what I would like employers to or businesses to take out of this, I think it's one thing to, we saw from the report that, employees really want to see their employers be public about their support for reproductive rights, but then also taking a step back and not only looking at your benefits package per se, or whether or not your insurance plans cover abortion care, but also what are your internal policies and how are they supporting your team members when they do need to be out of the office to, access abortion care, or whether or not they need to travel. So I think that's also important too. Maybe it's having a set of travel days that can be leveraged or used by your staff, both men and women on your staff. Men may need to be there to support their partners. And I think that's a piece of this too. Not to forget about your internal policies and also the environment that you have within your business, ensuring that is supportive of your staff. You're showing empathy when staff need to be off or need to wrestle with, making what can be a difficult decision about their health.
Can I just say one other quick thing, Rachel? Also, particularly in states that don't have early voting or vote by mail, ensure that your companies give time off to vote on election day. Because I think clearly we are in multiple crises of trust right now, and I think one of the ways that hopefully we move forward is when everyone participates in our democracy. Like, I want everybody to vote. I mean, if you're over 18, you're an American citizen, I want you to vote. Even if you don't agree with me, I want you to vote, because that is how we actually, I think, have a restored sense that our democracy represents us and kind of who we are and what we hope and what we dream and what we believe our country should be. And so I absolutely agree. Yes, you should give actual paid family leave for whatever anyone may need it to take care of whatever may be happening in their lives or their families' lives. And also, you shouldn't be penalized for taking time to vote.
And we have seen, as Nancy mentioned, when people are voting, when this issue is put on the ballot, we have seen even the most conservative states in this country vote in favor of protecting access to abortion rights, states like Kansas. Nancy, I just want to give you the final word here because you have done immense work on this subject. Center for Reproductive Rights. Tell people about where they can find you if they're looking for more information on this subject about reproductive rights. Tell everyone where they can find that more information.
Great, well, thank you. Reproductiverights.org is our website. There's a lot there about both the cases going on, the state of the law around the country, but also things that you can do and how you can be engaged. Obviously, follow us on Instagram, follow us on all the various platforms. If you're interested in learning more about how companies can think about this, you can reach out to corporateinfo@reprorights.org. Someone in my organization shout out if I got that wrong. corporateinfo@reprorights.org. They can find out more about that. And the other just last thing I want to say about starting the conversation is so important. And even if you just start it in your own life and then move it into your business life, I think it's 80-something% of women in the United States will be pregnant, carry it to term, right, and have a baby. So they know what we're talking about. 1 in 4 will have an abortion. They know what we're talking about. Something like 99% of heterosexual women will use contraceptives in their lifetime. And I think about 10% of the American public will struggle with infertility. These are issues that people know about. But for many years, we're so stigmatized that the conversation didn't even begin. And that has been a big change and a wake-up call after, Dobbs. But you should know, people know, right? You can talk to them about the full range of reproductive health care issues. They're familiar. Women are familiar.
Great. And then I also wanted to follow up after the fabulous Nancy, and just to share, if folks are interested in delving deeper into IWPR's research when it comes to the business case for reproductive rights, you should see a QR code on the slide here. Feel free to click on that. And then also, if you wanted to reach out to us for any other questions in terms of our research, go to iwpr.org. Thank you all so much.
Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. I hope you all found something to take away from this conversation. We thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.